R&D money that industry puts into this really drives a commercial sector investment that comes from a lot of directions. The DoD can never probably match that investment. Anywhere in government would never match that investment. So we're using capability that's been developed largely in the commercial sector and adapting it to military use. Very much different from the aircraft carrier model that I go to a single shipyard in the United States, give the specifications for a carrier and expect them to build it, whereas going to the model where I want to be able to use an iPad securely, and Apple says, you don't get this. I'm a consumer electronics firm. I'm not a security firm, and there's very little willingness to take a very small slice of the market and do something different with a device like that. And I think we've seen that repeated time and time again since we asked RIM to put an on and off button on BlackBerry many years ago. And so that's the piece that is really going to be difficult for us, I think, to integrate a lot of technologies into DoD, do it securely in a way that we feel comfortable with, that I can put something that's pretty much off-the-shelf technology onto a sensor, use that sensor in my data stream and knowing it's going to be secure. We haven't crossed that bridge yet, and I think the workarounds that we've talked about are either carving off a piece of the cellular spectrum and that we would basically buy on lease from the big bandwidth providers and do VPNs through there permanently. I'm not sure that's the long-term solution to this, but the problem is we're not coming up with custom-made solutions the way that we did in the platform world. So those are the two things that I think make cyber a little bit different to go through there and make it somewhat difficult for us to think about using technology as ubiquitously as we can in the commercial sector. One of the other challenges in cyberspace is how fast that a weapon can change the nature of what it can do to you. If you look at the tiny evolutionary steps of a Tomahawk over its now nearly 30-year life, all of those are very incremental changes that are somewhat predictable with the technology that's available and the physics that you just can't break those rules. If you go back to the configure worm and look at that, which started about 2 years ago, I think it was November of 9, actually 3 years ago, November of 8, that the first version was a pretty basic worm, easy to detect, but then it re-weaponized itself 4 times between then and April of 09. And so if you think about that in the platform world, kind of meeting those challenges of having to fundamentally redesign a point defense missile, because that's really what you're talking about, 4 times in that short of a time span, would absolutely break us in a platform mentality that you have. So that means that on countering adversary weapons, we have to have a different way of thinking about how we're going to defend. The system that me and probably many of you in this room developed in the mid-90s, that was sort of a patch and wait defensive system, won't work in the environment that you have, and it certainly won't work in the environment where you have an adversary that can re-weaponize within a few hours. That, I think, leads us to looking at new ways of using our computers. I was asked the question at lunch about clouds. I think it's a balance that we'll have to understand. For the most part, I like clouds because I don't have to defend 3 or 4 PCs that are under everyone's desk. On the other hand, it has the challenge of if someone gets inside of the virtual machines, then it's much harder to detect perhaps than it is. So it's a balance, and we'll work our way through that. I think, though, in the long run, taking advantage of having computing power that can be bought and sold inside of a central facility that's easily expandable and a smaller attack surface is probably the way to go, and it's how we'll develop. But it will be one of the necessary things that we do because patch and wait really doesn't work. That, I guess, leads me to my last point, and I'll leave you with some time for questions. It's that challenge between resiliency and functionality, and where security meets on that spectrum. I kind of grew up in a world on the SIGINT side of the Navy where security was the most important thing, and that drove us, I think, in that hub and spoke network way to having a very, very complex way to talk about security. If any of you worked a program, you know that the certification and accreditation process is arduous, and what's more, if I look at it from a technical point of view, it really isn't doing much to prove the technology or not. It's saying, do I have the normal standard-based security systems in place, but it doesn't really go through and look at end-to-end, how well do I patch, how secure is the underlying software system, what's my programmatic plan for putting a new operating system in line 2 or 3 years down the line. And we go back, and it's not a very effective way to do that, and it probably using more resources on the certification and accreditation side than we're mitigating risk on the operational side. So I think that's one of the other things that I've got to look for as I go forward, is how do we get a better balance there in terms of standards-based systems that are easily put into fragments that we can build on those architectural pieces across the board to have a function of a program that might work very well for that, reuse it in a secure way, and continue to develop around that, rather than very, very big systems that are going to be increasingly harder to secure. I think I would go back to the last points, is that the point I made about assuring command and control. If we can't do that in the Navy, we're not going to be an effective part of the joint force, and that's where my staff across the 4 sectors, whether it's those who are building unmanned platforms or those building our networks, get that that's where we've got to go. That's the challenge. If the Navy can't get an ATO tonight, if the Navy can't get an MBU to the Tomahawk shooter tonight, we're not going to project power. And those things are all developed and delivered by the network. So that's the first piece for me. We've got to continue to work with the joint force to get the command and control right here. It's the rules that we all grew up in command and control fundamentally work, and we've got to exercise those. Cyber doesn't have to be different. And we spent a lot of time on this at 10th Fleet and working through a lot of different models, but we came back to the same principles. OPCON is OPCON, and it works in cyber command. It works in cyberspace. TACON is TACON, and it will also work there, and they can adapt as well. When you start getting away from that, you start getting to models that we would all feel pretty uncomfortable with. And my analogy is, it's sort of like the J3 walking down to a pier and saying, "Skipper, let's get underway." That we can't do in cyberspace, because it would be as chaotic as doing it the same way that we would do that in platforms. We've also got to do inspections and assessments the same way that we do in the other areas. We started at 10th Fleet, the ability to do that. Admiral McCullough and I were really surprised to find that we turned the inspection of our networks, our Navy networks, over to the Joint Force. That's got to come back inside the Navy. We started doing that, and we found that that made a huge difference at the command level and their performance in these inspections over the last several months. And then get the operator culture focused on the importance of networks for what they do. Not that understanding right now that if you can have SPAY or go baseline a network, you can go back the next way. The IT force on the ship has changed things away from that baseline. We wouldn't do that any other place that we operate. We've got to drive that mentality out of how we think of operating networks. And rebuild what's fundamentally a fragile infrastructure, because go back to some of the first thoughts, we've built this over the last 15 years, iteratively with new pieces on top of the next. So there's got to be some baseline to do, and we've got that, I think, both within Keynes and Engine. It's a program in Engine. So with that, I hopefully whetted your appetite with a few questions, and again, thank you very much for offering the opportunity to come talk.
Well, as Americans, we've always had an advantage, whether it's the F-14, the F-18, the F-15, now the Joint Strike Fighter. What gives us our advantage in cyber?
Thanks for the question. Thanks for your service as well. I think that, you know, it sounds kind of glib to answer it this way to start, but I'll start here. We invented this stuff. So, I mean, but I don't mean that in a glib way. I think we have a sense of the resiliency that the original ARPANET was developed to have in how we think about the networks. And that flexibility, I think, gives us an advantage that you won't find in most of our adversaries that we would consider. The openness of the internet, if you go to the PRC, if you go to any of the totalitarian states, the first thing they do is lock it down. And we saw it all over through Arab Spring. We know how, you see it in regular normal press with the Great Wall, the Great Firewall that the PRC has built. So I think that's the number one discerning fact. This openness will really give us the advantage because we have a sense that you can do a lot with this platform. And I really do think about this platform. But you have to think about defense, and you've got to think about what that really means. There are some things that I think are kind of frustrating. I came back into the building, after the nearly 2 years at 10th Fleet, and the ROE discussion is exactly where it was when I left in the fall of 2009. We've got to get on with this. I'm pretty sure of a couple of things. One, that if there was an attack someplace on national infrastructure, the military will come to support that attack because we're the only ones with capacity. DHS has the mission set to do that, but they have no capacity. So we've got to figure it out at that level, and I think that's one of the pieces that has to be done. So there are some things going on with enduring security framework and putting better defenses in front of some of the big defense companies that are supplying the crucial technology that we need for these platforms. So we've got to do that. We've got to have a different basis of how we think about that partnership with industry than we have when we're building a joint strike fighter. There's a competition thing. Here I think there's more, but we're all in this together kind of thing. And so to build those things out, and those initiatives are out there, and they're getting traction. There was a lot of reluctance in the first because, if I let, DHS or NSA, bring Einstein technologies in, I'm going to have to give something away. And I think in the long run, we're finding that we can protect the things that are intellectual property based, but also provide better defense on top of that. So it's going to take evolution on both sides to really get where we need to go. Policies first. Yes, sir.
Admiral, I thought your discussion was an excellent roundup of the issues that we're concerned about. But other than what you just said about ROE, how would you grade our Navy today? Where are we? What kind of progress are we actually making?
For our preparation for cyberspace, and I will quote General Alexander, the Navy is far ahead of the other services. We built something that was different. And I'll go back to one of the first things that I said, Casey. If you think about cyberspace, you've got to think about both sides of cyberspace. You've got to think about blue cyberspace that you want to operate and defend, and you've got to think about red cyberspace where you want to operate and attack. It's the same as airspace or water space. The way that we built this nationally was that NSA provides us that red cyberspace capability more than any other capability that we have in the government. When we built 10th Fleet, we gave Admiral McCullough both operate and defend authorities, but we also gave him authorities on the intelligence side to do the preparation of the battle space and really preparation of the attack space within